Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at something really specific, herbal medicine, but through the very personal lens of dealing with long COVID.
Yeah, we're drawing on the experiences of Sam Kaufman from Herbal Medics Academy. It's about his own journey, really, the herbs he used, the methods.
Right. And our goal here is to understand that journey, not just because he's a, highly qualified herbalist, but also as someone who actually went through long COVID himself.
Exactly. And it's fascinating because you see how that deep knowledge of herbs really informs how someone approaches their own health crisis. I mean, Sam's background is pretty incredible.
It really is. He's been working with herbs since, 1987?
Yeah, and over 15 years as a clinical herbalist. Yeah. Plus, he's a registered herbalist, a wilderness EMT, hold a master's in acupuncture and oriental medicine,
Right.
a BA in linguistics, he's a special forces medic veteran, even a black belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu.
So a very diverse skill set, and he's written books, runs the Herbal Medics Academy. It definitely establishes his expertise.
For sure.
Okay, so let's start with when he first got COVID. This was about 2.5 years ago.
Roughly. And he stresses, it was the sickest he'd ever been.
Even though he was vaccinated?
Yeah, he mentioned he was vaccinated, but doesn't really draw a conclusion either way about its role in his specific case. He's pretty neutral on that point regarding his own experience.
And the situation itself sounds really challenging. He was at high altitude?
Right, living in an RV, so he didn't have easy access to his full apothecary's usual setup.
That must have been tough, especially with severe symptoms.
Definitely. He described serious difficulty breathing, oxygen saturation down in the mid-80s.
Oh.
Yeah, bad enough he had to sleep sitting upright. It paints a picture of a really acute, serious situation.
So what happened when he did manage to get some herbs? His wife brought them, right?
Yes, and this is where it gets quite striking. He started doing steam inhalations.
Okay.
Using a combination of juniper berry, grindelia, which is also called gumid, and thyme. He mentioned chaparral too.
And the effect?
He said within about 30 minutes, he felt a really dramatic improvement in his breathing.
30 minutes. Wow. That's fast.
It really is. And it highlights, how effective targeted delivery can be, like steam straight to the lungs, juniper as an expectorant, grindelia relaxes airways, thyme as antiseptic, powerful stuff together.
Yeah, that synergy is key. But like you hear so often with COVID, getting over the initial sickness wasn't the end.
No. Exactly. About a month, maybe 2 months later, the long COVID symptoms started cropping up.
Okay, let's get into that. What was his take on what was happening?
His belief as a clinical herbalist is that long COVID is specifically tied to inflammation of the nervous system. He particularly points to potential damage to the myelin sheath.
That protective coating on nerves.
Right.
Essential for signals.
Exactly. And he actually developed a formula, Neuro-Regen, based on this idea. It uses some traditional Chinese medicine herbs known for myelin sheath support, like Cornus officinalis.
Is that something he used on himself right away?
Well, interestingly, he admits he didn't. You know how it is sometimes. Practitioners aren't always the best at treating themselves first.
Yeah, the shoemaker's children. So what were his main long COVID symptoms then?
The big ones for him were depression and anxiety, which he said were really uncharacteristic for him, not something he usually struggled with. And it was also during this time he kind of realized he probably has always had ADHD, but the long COVID seemed to maybe bring it more to the surface or exacerbate it.
That's interesting. So it can really manifest mentally and emotionally in unexpected ways.
Absolutely. Which leads us to a pretty major turning point for him involving an herb called Sananga.
Sananga. Okay, what is that?
It comes from the Amazon rainforest, made from the bark, maybe the roots too, of a particular tree.
And had he used it before?
Yes, actually. About 10 years earlier, he'd tried it at a place called Eden Hot Springs. Back then, the use was intraocular, so in the eyes specifically to try and enhance night vision.
In the eyes. Wow, what was that like?
He remembers it being quite painful, like a strong stinging, but said it did seem to work for the night vision aspect back then.
Okay. So fast forward, he's dealing with long COVID depression and anxiety.
Right. And he sees Sananga being discussed online, on social media, in the context of potentially helping with these kinds of issues. So he decides to try it again.
Did he just buy it anywhere?
No, he made a point of researching and finding a company that seemed to have ethical sourcing practices, which is important with these traditional medicines.
Good point. And what happened when he tried it this time? He used it intraocularly again.
Yes, in the eyes. And he used an extra strength version. He described the pain as really intense this time.
I can only imagine.
But almost immediately, he felt a psychotropic effect. Not like hallucinating, but a definite shift in his mental state.
How so?
He described it as quite profound, sort of a spiritual, energetic experience, feeling outside his body, a sense of reconnection, even feeling reassured by the spirit of the plant, as he put it.
Wow, that's quite an experience.
But the most tangible result, the thing he really emphasizes, was the depression. He said the fog just lifted within like 20 or 30 minutes.
Gone, just like that.
Significantly cleared. He felt a major, lasting improvement in his mood from that point on.
Okay, so putting aside the spiritual aspect for a moment, what's his sort of Western clinical hypothesis for why that might happen?
His idea is that applying Sananga directly to the eyes might somehow reduce neural inflammation.
Directly affecting the nervous system via the eyes.
That's the hypothesis.
Yeah.
He connects it to other work he's done with, say, intranasal sprays or nebulized herbs. It seems to have sparked his interest in these more direct routes, intraocular, intranasal for getting anti-inflammatory or neuroregenerative compounds, maybe even things like honey or specific glycerites, closer to the central nervous system.
That makes sense, accessing the brain more directly.
Right. And for him, personally, he says Sananga completely turned the corner on his depression. It was a game changer.
That's incredible. But you mentioned ADHD. Did the Sananga help with that too?
Apparently not, or at least not directly. He said even after the depression lifted, he noticed his ADHD patterns maybe even seemed worse or just more noticeable without the depression fog.
Okay, so in another challenge, what did he explore for that?
This led him to lacticarium, which is the resin from wild lettuce or prickly lettuce, sometimes called opium lettuce, though it's not an opiate.
Great, I've heard of it. He extracts it himself.
Yeah, he mentioned he's been extracting the resin for about 15 years.
Yeah.
It involves alcohol, water, heat, results in this concentrated black resin. He said it's about a 20.1 concentration.
And how did he use it for the ADHD symptoms?
Sublingually. So dissolving a small amount, he mentioned maybe a third of a gram up to a gram under his tongue.
Yeah.
Holding it there for 5 or 10 minutes.
Not eating it, just letting it absorb.
Exactly. And he found doing this maybe once a week or so really helped him with focus.
That's interesting because isn't lacticarium usually known more for anxiety or pain?
That's exactly what he said. His main clinical use for it previously was as an anxiolytic to help clients with anxiety. Finding it helpful for focus was a new discovery for him based on his own experience.
So it helped his focus, but maybe not everyone's.
He did make that point. You know, these nerve-right herbs, as he calls them, can have quite varied effects from person to person. But for him, the lacticarium, taken sublingually as a simple, just the single herb, that's what hit the mark for the ADHD type symptoms.
The administration route, again, sublingual this time.
Right. And he really comes back to this point repeatedly, how you take the herb steam inhalation in the eye, under the tongue, up the nose, nebulized it, can make a huge difference in the effect, especially when you're trying to target the nervous system.
It sounds like he thinks that neural inflammation piece is pretty central to a lot of long COVID issues.
That seems to be his working theory, yeah. That even things like respiratory symptoms might have a central nervous system inflammation component driving them, not just localized lung issues.
Mm-hmm. So wrapping this up then, we've seen Sam Kaufman's really intense personal fight with severe COVID and then long COVID.
Yeah, and how that personal experience pushed him towards some maybe less common herbal approaches. The intraocular Sananga for depression, a really unexpected, dramatic turning point.
And then the sublingual lacticarium for the focus and ADHD symptoms.
Exactly. What really stands out is how these specific administration routes seemed key for addressing the neurological aspects he was experiencing. It wasn't just what herb, but how it was delivered.
It makes you think, doesn't it? How delivering herbs more directly, more targeted to specific tissues like the nervous system, might unlock potentials we haven't fully explored.
Definitely. It broadens the conversation beyond just the herbs themselves to how we can best utilize them.
So a final thought maybe for you listening. How could exploring different ways of administering familiar remedies, or even less familiar ones, potentially open up new possibilities for health and healing? Something to think about and perhaps research further on your own.